Now what I want to do is give you a little bit more formal a talk tonight. When I talk, a lot of people want to know, well, we're interested in Cape Wind, but we also want to know how that's going to affect us. What do I care? I live in Methuen. I go to the Cape once or twice a year if I manage to get down there at all. Why should I be concerned about what happens to this project and other wind projects in New England? So I have a little bit of a talk, and then we'll do Q&A. March Madness is just around the corner, and this year it will include yet another round of Cape Wind public hearings, just like those I just read to you about. But 6 years into the permitting process, these hearings matter very little. Cape Wind has already received a comparatively clean bill of health. Nothing is likely to change that. The real issue now facing the project is, can it be financed? How much will the project cost? Can the company execs succeed in a tight lending market? Will the project raise or lower our electric rates? In other words, how will Cape Wind fit into both the New England power markets and the finance markets? Cape Wind LLC, a private entity, isn't talking specifics, but here's what's known. This 130 turbine, 468 megawatt project will probably cost about $2 billion, more than twice the 6-year-old estimate of $700,000. So that's what all the delays caused by the people that I just talked to you about have cost this project. Cape Wind has confirmed a $1.6 billion estimate for the project. Since costs are expected to continue to rise and litigation will inevitably hold the project up for many more months, if not years, a $2 billion estimate is reasonable. Cape Wind's internal per kilowatt hour costs will likely range from 15 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Cape Wind years ago put the figure at just over 12 cents. We can reasonably assume an increase. Nevertheless, though it seems counterintuitive, Cape Wind will dampen New England power prices. Years ago, independent experts agreed with Cape Wind's claim that it would save ratepayers at least $25 million a year. That figure may now be higher. Here's why. Cape Wind's internal per kilowatt hour cost is irrelevant. For Cape Wind to attract investors, the company must sign up long-term contracts. In today's deregulated market, what's relevant is with whom the company signs those long-term power contracts and for how much. Perhaps the company will contract with a green aggregator, an entity that buys green power and resells it to voluntary buyers. These institutions, universities or ski resorts perhaps, willingly pay more for power for a variety of reasons. Such a long-term contract would lower overall regional power costs by decreasing demand while still allowing Cape Wind to charge more for its power. Or perhaps Cape Wind will contract with a more general entity which sells power from many different sources. This would still dampen overall power prices by introducing much-needed competition into New England's grid. New England ratepayers face a major problem right now. People in New Hampshire, people in Vermont, people in Methuen, people on Cape Cod. Under deregulation, electricity markets are supposed to be competitive. But competition only works if there are plenty of competitors. Right now, the New England power grid does not have enough competition. And what's more important in the long run, the grid does not have enough different kinds of power sources competing against each other. In part, this is because so many wind energy projects have been delayed so long in so many different locations, from the hills of Vermont to the shorelines of Cape Cod. Consequently, in New England, on high power consumption days, it's a seller's market. All available power sources must operate, including the very, very expensive ones. On Cape Cod, on Martha's Vineyard, in southwestern Connecticut, and in many other locales, on a very hot summer day, on Cape Cod, the air literally turns a dull yellow-orange. This did not happen 20 years ago. This is because many local emergency peaking plants that burn very expensive and highly polluting diesel fuel have been called online to keep the air conditioners running. During peak periods, a kilowatt hour may cost as much as 50 cents or even more. The cap on that is all the way up to $1. And if you're like us, on Cape Cod, you pay about 10 cents normally for a retail kilowatt hour. So you can see that when it's very hot, those prices that we end up paying skyrocket. This is the business case for wind in New England. If wind power, especially land-based wind, which can sometimes deliver power at 4 or 5 or 6 cents a kilowatt hour, enjoyed a 20% market share in New England, the system-wide cost of power for all of us would drop. This goal could be achieved within a few very short years if political leaders choose to make it so. Unfortunately for the people of New England, there are very few elected officials in office today who understand the meaning of the word leadership. The rewards for building wind projects throughout New England will come much more quickly than merely staving off climate change. The air and water will clean up, which is a very good thing. Homeowners' pocketbooks will also benefit. A healthy amount of wind power on the New England grid will depress even New England energy prices overall. Natural gas not used for electric power production, for example, will become more available and thus less expensive for home heating in the wintertime. If you heat with natural gas, it's conceivable those costs will go down. This would be good for consumers, but it would be bad for old-fashioned expensive power plants. This is why the coal industry in particular fears wind power, and why Cape Wind has devolved into a battle over the future of coal. On one side of the Cape Wind battle right now, we have Glenn Watley, a coal industry insider who is leading the very well-heeled forces of the anti-group. On the other side, we have a pro-wind group financed by a nonprofit that wants to stop coal development all over the United States. Roughly 50% of the nation's power comes from coal. 91% of the coal produced in this country is sold to the electric power industry. Aside from producing the electricity that turns on our lights at night, there is very little else that coal can be used for. Lots of wind power means that more than one coal baron will be out of a job. The Energy Information Agency says that coal's market share will drop as wind increases. This has already begun. As an example, a Kansas utility recently chose to build a wind project over a new coal plant. The reason? Wind was cheaper in the long run. What about the ultimate question? Can Cape Wind be financed? In 2001, analysts thought not. The risks seemed to outweigh the benefits. Here's the irony. Had Cape Wind been permitted in a timely manner, the company might well have failed at assembling a financial package. Today, lenders think differently. Land-based wind is now seen as safe. Large investors like life insurance companies now see coal as risky. Given our next president will likely implement clean energy policies like carbon cap and trade, coal and carbon have become dangerous. They have too many unknowns for investors. Cost of fuel, anti-carbon public policies, climate change. Investors are now wary of spending their money in those places. On which side of the ledger will Cape Wind fall? As a first step, the company must succeed in winning a long-term contract. Even if it does, large investors may still feel nervous. Offshore wind has no American track record. Some analysts even doubt whether Cape Wind will be able to buy offshore turbines, which are currently manufactured only for European systems. The future of land-based wind in America and even in New England looks rosy. But industry insiders are taking a wait-and-see attitude on financing Cape Wind and other offshore projects, even while the offshore industry is moving full speed ahead in Europe. Cape Wind execs, however, remain entirely upbeat. Can we finance this? Asked company president Jim Gordon. Just watch us.